Greetings, fellow songwriters and seekers, and welcome back to Muse and Measure, where we tackle life's spiritual and existential conundrums through songwriting practice. If you'd like to deepen your songwriting practice and connect it to a spiritual one, click the little guy in the lotus petal down below and subscribe so we can go on this journey together. All right, today's question comes from Bellingham, Washington. It's where my parents met. From Josephine, who writes, how can one use lyrics to write to a crescendo, emotional catharsis, or high point? This is an excellent question, and I think it really points to how we can learn from different genres of writing to help us build better lyrics and also build more satisfying songs emotionally. So this reminds me of the story arc, how it starts out with kind of mellow energy and builds up intensity to a climax or a crescendo. So let's first of all look at a story arc. So it looks like a roller coaster, and the higher the peak of the roller coaster, the more intense the experience is. So the first part is called the exposition, and it's kind of the boring part. As you can see in a roller coaster, if that was it for the roller coaster, you'd want your money back. But this part is really, really important, because this is where we learn who a character is, what time period they're in, where they live, what their job is, what's the status quo of their life is. Do they have a family? Are they in a relationship? Are they a loner? What do they do for a living? All these things are not that exciting because they're not building any tension, but they're still absolutely essential for understanding the story. Otherwise, you wouldn't know what was going on. I'm sure we've all had the experience of going into a movie, halfway through, and we're like, who are these people and why should I care about them? Who are, hanging off of a cliff. So the exposition is really, really important. And then you have this inciting incident. So this is what's going to take them out of their day-to-day routine, take them out of the status quo. A problem is going to be introduced. This could be falling in love, this could be losing something, this could be a call to the hero's adventure. Whatever it is, it's something that's going to take them out of that day-to-day status quo. And then it's not like this conflict that is introduced here is easily solved. It's a boring story if it's easily solved. Like Paul is a plumber, lives in the Lower East Side. On his way to work, he reached into his pocket and realized he'd lost his wallet. So that's the conflict. And then if Paul looks around for 5 minutes, finds his wallet on the street, and goes back to, getting on the bus, going to work, nobody wants to hear that story. It's a boring story. Instead, you have to have a rising action, building the tension. So Paul's this loss of wallet leads to all these unforeseen consequences, and it's going to really ruin his life. Or maybe it leads to some other deeper conflict that goes on, and it builds up to this climax where it seems like all hope is going to be lost. There's no chance that he's going to get out of this situation. He's going to get killed, or he's going to lose everything. And that's when we're on the edge of our seats and we're really, really rooting for Paul. And if it's a comedy, meaning it has a happy ending, then Paul is going to succeed. It's going to resolve with him reaching his goal, getting his wallet back, and being a hero. Or if it's tragedy, it's going to end with his death or just losing, right? So we have this resolution, and then finally the denouement, which is going back to the normal life, but in a changed state. You are altered. The person who was a loser is now a hero, and their perspective is different, even though they're going back to the Shire, whatever it is. Okay? So how does this relate to song structure? Well, this is really, really useful because when we look at song structure, it's also like a roller coaster, just a more complicated one. And this will help us to understand the intensity not only of the lyrics, but also of the music. So what should be happening in the music to support the lyrics, to do the job of each section. So the verse section, as you can see, is pretty flat. It's not all that exciting. That's because this is like the exposition of a story. It gives the background, important details. It explains things and gives the details so that we fully understand who let the dogs out, who are these dogs and why should we care about that they're out? Why is that important? And what are they going to do when they're out? Sorry, that's a horrible example, but that's what a verse does, okay? And as you can see, the energy is not super exciting. So the lyrics, they're not going to be emotionally dead or not intense, but they are going to be more expository and explaining and giving you the important details so that you understand what the chorus is about when we get to it, which is kind of the big climax. Okay? So how do we get from the flat, kind of boring, non-intense verse section to this peak of super excitement? Now, it would be very jarring to jump up in that intensity. So instead, they've invented this thing called the pre-chorus, which ramps us up in the intensity. Okay? And then the chorus is the climax. But as you can see, with song structure, this comes back again and again. And this is really important to note because each section as it gets repeated is more intense. And it's like a shifting, kind of like, in a car, in a manual transmission car, you're constantly shifting up the intensity. So the second time a verse comes around, it's still flat, but as you can see, it's at a greater intensity, musically and lyrically. Okay? And then a bridge helps with the building of intensity because we get tired of this repetition of verse, pre-chorus, chorus, verse, pre-chorus, chorus. If we did that once again, then, the intensity would be gone because we know what to expect. Okay? As soon as you know what to expect and there's no surprises, the intensity is going to drop rapidly. So the bridge gives us the opportunity to have a palate cleanser, to give us a totally new perspective. And musically and lyrically, it should be very different from the rest of the song as far as what its function is. Okay? Lyrically, it's going to give us a broader perspective on things. It's going to be like a source of wisdom that's going to interject. And this happens in stories too. Think about with Star Wars, like when whiny Luke Skywalker is at the intense experiences that he's having, and he just can't take it, and he's just whining all the time. When Obi-Wan comes and visits and gives him that sprinkling of wisdom, he has a brand new perspective, and he sees things a little bit clearer. That's what a bridge does functionally. Okay? Just like a literal bridge. When you're up high, it connects two sections, but it also gives us a new perspective on things. Okay. So, so one more thing about the bridge. It admits some kind of hidden truth. It shifts from self-pity to insight, expresses anger, surrender, love in its rawest form. Okay? So, how do we build this intensity lyrically when we talk about, the story arc and song structure? Well, we're going to start restrained. We don't want to give away the grand finale, the emotional payoff, the catharsis in our verse sections. We want to be focused on more detailed, oriented lyric writing. And when you're writing verses, you can use a lot more space. You can use longer lines because it's not about repetition and emotional impact through the rhythm. It's about just kind of laying the groundwork for understanding what the chorus is about. That's its function. Okay? And usually verses are probably the hardest part to write because even though the melody repeats the same every single time, the lyrics change. So it's usually a lot more words that you need to write, and you have to put a lot more thought into your verses. It's also delicate too because you are trying to be expository and give details, but you also don't want to be boring. So they have to be grounded in imagery and giving like a mental movie for your listener, so that they don't turn off and stop paying attention. Okay? You start to build attention with subtle everyday things, just like exposition in a story. I keep forgetting what day it is, or I didn't recognize my face in the mirror, or I cut myself shaving. If you want great examples of this, just listen to classic country songs when they sing about their day-to-day life, looking in their cup of coffee. How do they do that so that there's a little bit of tension there so you know that there's something wrong with the protagonist of the story, where there's, something's about to happen that's going to change their life and their perspective, but without giving that away. So it's a really kind of subtle and challenging thing to do in the verse sections. Okay? So each new section as it comes up brings more vulnerability. So the character, if you're writing from your own perspective or taking on a persona, you want to become more and more vulnerable, more raw, less guarded as the song continues. You can use repetition and shorter lines. So da 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 da. You want something to continually repeat over and over again, because that also builds tension. So you can have short little repeating lines on the pre-chorus that are much more repetitive than the verse, and that builds up the energy as well. Okay? And then you want to have your imagery evolve throughout the song and become much more intense. So if I looked at my coffee cup in the beginning, on the second verse around, how could I make that imagery much more intense? Okay? The clouds in my coffee cup started to thunder and rain, something like that. So the intensity increases. So we can take these ideas of the story arc and the functions of the different aspects of it, and we can really use that. So verse section is, once again, is telling the story, giving the background information. The pre-chorus, we're starting, things are getting intense, you know, just when you start, you're freaking out, okay? And then when the chorus hits, you want to just have this rawness. What would your character say, or what would you say, like, you know, when you're in the intensity of a fight, or the most intense of a like crybaby moment where you're just weeping? What is something in that most vulnerable place that you would shout out without even any kind of inhibitions or self-awareness that you'd probably be embarrassed about later if someone played you back the video? That's the kind of emotion or lyric that you want to shout out during the chorus. And then maybe after the bridge, you've had this transformation through wisdom, a greater perspective. How does that change that crybaby moment where you're just like shouting out? How does that alter for the final chorus, the final climax, where you're coming back to the status quo, but transformed as a new character? So this is all food for thought, and I hope it is helpful for you to delve into this, to use the story arc and song structure to look at how emotion and intensity builds throughout a song. I've created a couple of videos where I go into detail about how certain songs use these tactics and how they do it. One is She's Leaving Home by the Beatles, and then I do one on something much more abstract, which doesn't tell a story, which is one of my songs called A Little at a Time. So if you want to go a little bit deeper in this and look at some examples about how songwriters have used these tools and tricks to build intensity in their lyrics as well as musically, then check out those other videos. So I'll put them down in the description. Until then, best of luck with your songwriting and your spiritual practice. If you have any questions or comments, please put them down in the comment section, or if you want to contact me directly, it's tyler@musemeasure.com. Best of luck with your songwriting, and until next time, good luck with all your endeavors.